Here's what's coming up on The World Today. The U.S. responds to China lifting COVID travel restrictions as cases rise in the country. China makes its remarks. We'll also hear from Pope Francis, who says his predecessor is very ill and asks pilgrims to pray for him. Plus, residents of Kherson in Russia flee Russian strikes on the city as it intensifies attacks. Well, we begin from news from around the world. China reopened its borders to the rest of the world, and the U.S. says it is considering imposing new COVID restrictions on those arriving from the country. American officials say this is due to a lack of transparency surrounding the virus in China as cases surge. Japan, Malaysia and Taiwan, worried at importing COVID cases, have already outlined tighter measures for Chinese travelers, including negative tests. Beijing has said COVID rules should be brought in on a scientific basis. India is also stepping up measures for Chinese arrivals, but this was announced before Beijing said it would relax its strict border policy. The country's immigration authorities say passport applications for Chinese citizens wishing to travel internationally will resume from January 8. Travel sites have reported a spike in traffic, leaving some countries fearful over the potential spread of COVID. Well, staying with China, its foreign ministry says there should be a scientific basis for implementing COVID-19 rules after the United States government announced it may impose new measures for travelers from China. U.S. officials made the announcement about the concerns of the lack of transparent data coming from Beijing, as some hospitals and funeral homes in China have been overwhelmed amidst a massive surge of COVID infections spreading unchecked across the country of 1.4 billion people. The foreign ministry spokesman, this is Wang Wenbing, told media in Beijing that China always believes that the pandemic prevention measures of all countries should be scientific and appropriate and should not affect normal exchanges between people. Official statistics have shown only one COVID death in 7 days to Monday, that's December 26, fueling doubts among health experts and residents about the government's data. The numbers are inconsistent with the experience of much less populous countries after they reopened. And Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee says the region will further optimize its COVID-19 control measures, dropping most restrictions except the mask mandate. Now, starting Thursday, the city will scrap mandatory on-arrival PCR tests and vaccine pass, Lee said at a press conference of the city's anti-epidemic command and coordination group. He also added that, third, removing all mandatory PCR tests for inbound travelers. Visitors coming from overseas, the mainland and Taiwan do not have to do mandatory PCR tests when they arrive or after they arrive in Hong Kong. Instead, visitors are advised to do rapid antigen tests all the way through the 5th day since their arrival. Fourth is also cancelling all social distancing rules, but then the mask mandate will continue. To other stories, China's Immigration Administration released a statement saying that it will resume processing citizens' applications for ordinary passports following adjustments to the country's COVID-19 prevention protocol. The administration released a statement following the downgraded management of COVID-19 from Class A to Class B announced by the country's National Health Commission. Immigration authorities will optimize policies and measures starting January 8, 2023 to actively adapt to the new situation and requirements in the new phase of the prevention and control of the virus, including resuming in an orderly manner the acceptance examination of Chinese citizens' application for ordinary passports for the purposes of tourism and friends visiting abroad, the processing of endorsements for Chinese mainland residents to visit the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region for tourism, and also business processes. Chinese travelers, in the meantime, will also be able to travel abroad more easily in light of the more targeted measures. Or staying with this particular matter, the situation in China and its COVID rules. Now, the Foreign Ministry, Wang Wenbin, the spokesperson at a briefing today, said that some Western media's claim that China has failed in fighting the epidemic, he said, is driven by bias and also politically motivated to smear China. He said that it cannot withstand the scrutiny of facts as it runs counter to the truth. The international community has seen this very clearly and will not be swayed by them. Mr. Wang also noted that since the onset of COVID-19, the Chinese government has put the people and their lives first, and based on China's reality, developed timely response policies that serve the interests of the greatest majority of the Chinese people. He continued that during the time when the virus posed the greatest danger, the COVID-19 response effectively protected people's lives and also health. He says, quote, "Facts are that since COVID began 3 years ago, the Chinese government has always put the people and their lives above all else. We have poured all our efforts and resources into protecting the life and health of every Chinese, which enabled us to stand each wave and get the nation through the difficult time when the virus was wreaking the deadliest havoc." He said, globally speaking, China has had the lowest rates of severe cases and also mortality. On the issue of the Omicron variant, he said, much less pathogenic and deadly. China's treatment, testing, vaccination capacity steadily on the rise, that the country has taken the initiative to refine its COVID-19 response measures. He said the country has adopted in an orderly fashion the 20 refined measures and 10 new measures. That's according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin. And a Syrian student who studies and lives in Nanjing City recently has taken a much-anticipated trip to Sanya in Henan province and found life was as normal as before after the country optimized measures on COVID-19. In his travel vlog, student Zain Ali said that except for some special places, such as elderly care, welfare, prisons, kindergartens, primary and secondary schools, other places no longer needed to check the nucleic acid test reports. He said that the reports where, he lives, there's no more of that. And as soon as the policy is out, most of the people felt free to really move around. Now, prior to his trip, Ali said he was worried about if the ease started, but as expected from Nanjing to Sanya, there were no more checkpoints, and he was not asked to present any travel code. The entry, he said, was very smooth at the airport. After arriving, he also said that he wasn't asked to present the code. Let's listen to him.
Actually, I was worried about if the A's started, but as expected. That a nucleic acid test point next to where I live, and there is no more nucleic acid test. As soon as the policy is out, most of the people felt free to move around, including me. I decided to travel to my favorite place in China, Hainan, Sanya. Actually, I was worried about if the A's started, but as expected, from Nanjing all the way to Sanya, didn't meet any checkpoints, nor was asked to present any travel code or nucleic acid test report, which was very convenient. At the airport, the entry was very smooth.
And day 308, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Lots are still happening even as others around the world enjoy their holiday. Well, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, has reaffirmed her government's support for Ukraine. Now, she took office in October and has been a firm supporter of Kyiv, despite friction on the issue within her rights ruling coalition and divided public opinion. Zelensky said said that during a call with the Italian Prime Minister, he thanked Meloni for aid already received and described the counterparts as acting in unison. Meloni's office earlier said the Italian government had renewed its full support for Kyiv in the political, military, economic and humanitarian fields to repair energy infrastructure and also to work for the future reconstruction of Ukraine.
З прем'єр-міністром Італії подякував за вже надану і за нову підтримку.
I spoke today with Italy's Prime Minister and thanked her for aid already received and new support. Mrs. Meloni announced that the supply of air defense systems is being discussed at the moment. We're acting in unison, and I believe that Italian support will allow us to strengthen the defense of our skies. Of course, we also discussed our diplomatic plans for the coming months, as well as the threats expected this winter, which I'm sure we will overcome together. We continue to prepare our security and defense forces for the next year. This must be a decisive year. We understated the risks that are there in the winter. We understand what we have to do in the spring, and hence we understand what results the security and defense sector has to achieve as a whole.
To talk to more about what's going on in Kyiv, joining us is VOA's Anna Chernikova. Hi Anna, it's good to see you. Tell us a bit about what today is like in the country.
Good evening. Well, Ukrainians continue to leave the war, and I should say that the war mood is the main mood currently across Ukraine and in Kyiv, particularly where I'm located. But I should say that Christmas holidays went quite, differently from normal, as people still were not able to completely enjoy Christmas as, war is ongoing. Now Ukrainians are getting ready for 2023, and of course with a lot of hopes and a lot of plans for 2023, and the main wish and the main hope for most of Ukrainians, for every Ukrainian I guess, is that the peace would come and the war would end, and of course Ukrainians want victory in this war.
And Anna, we're hearing that civilians are fleeing more military strikes, which appears to be happening in Kherson.
Yeah, well, the city of Kherson, unfortunately, is currently, well, for the past weeks, is under very ruthless attack by Russian forces. As we know, the city of Kherson, which was liberated, and part of the Kherson region that were liberated recently, are still very close to the Russian forces, as Russian forces are located just on the other side of the river. So the city of Kherson is constantly under artillery attack, and because the distance is not very far, and Russian artillery systems can reach the city, these attacks just non-stop, so they just continue. And if you look through the reports from the city during the day, you see information and you see reports about explosions, one explosion, second, third, and these explosions happen just during the day for a lot of times, not even a couple of times. And this is the current life of the city of Kherson. We hear about a lot of residential areas that are damaged, and a lot of civilians which are injured or unfortunately even killed. Also a lot of hospitals are under attacks, and there are reports and footages of destruction. So the city of Kherson unfortunately remains well, a very hot spot, and not a very safe place for the civilians, but still a lot of civilians do not want to leave, do not want to evacuate, because they want to stay at home. And I should say that Kherson and Bakhmut in the Donetsk region remain two main hotspots at the front line for the moment.
We're also seeing that this, strikes happen close to the spots where masses had gathered, waving Ukrainian flags, to celebrate the freedom from Russian control. And we're also hearing, mortars were hit 41 times. One wonders, having left Kherson, what the objective is now for Russia hitting Kherson so much.
Well, I think that here we can see something similar as it happened to the city of Mariupol before it was occupied. So Russian forces if we look at the city of Mariupol, it was strategically for them to actually enter the city. And now with the city of Kherson, it's kind of, they're paying back to people who didn't want them there, I guess, and also creating, this terror effect, horror effect, so people cannot live normal life, basically just creating, this impossibility to continue their life, to do the rebuilding, because Ukrainian authorities, the first day they entered the city, when the city was liberated, started all this recoverment and all the, especially for the critical infrastructure. And now we see that Russian forces just create, this kind of conditions that people cannot live in this city. So basically saying, well, you didn't want us controlling your city, then you're not going to have peace, until we can create these conditions of shelling. So unfortunately, I should say that it pretty much looks like another war crime committed by Russian forces. At least this is what we see from all the footages, from all the official reports, and all the witnesses, civilian witnesses who are living through this every day. And really sad that civilians are the main target, and civilians are suffering the most.
Do hold on, we need to go on a short break. When we return, we'll still be talking to Anna Chernikova for more on what's going on in Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back. Still on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, VOA's Anna Chernikova is standing by. But let's fill you in on just a few updates that we are seeing. The Kremlin, we understand, has dismissed Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's 10-point peace plan, saying that proposals to end the conflict in Ukraine must take into account what it calls today's realities of 4 Ukrainian regions having joined Russia. The Kremlin spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, said that there can be no peace plan for Ukraine that does not take into account the realities of today. Russia declared Ukraine's Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, Zaporizhia regions as part of its territory in September after referendums condemned by Ukraine and Western countries. Russia does not fully control any of the 4 regions, we are told. President Zelensky has been promoting his 10-point peace plan, which he first announced in November, discussing it with U.S. President Joe Biden, among others, urging world leaders to hold a global peace summit based on it. Also, Russia did not consult with OPEC Plus on its response to a Western price cap on Russian oil. This is also coming from Dmitry Peskov, who stated that it was Russia's sovereign right to respond as it sees fit to illegal measures. President Vladimir Putin yesterday delivered Russia's long-awaited response to the cap, signing a decree that bans the supply of crude oil and oil products from February the 1st next year by 5 months to nations that abide by it. Mr. Peskov said contracts between Russia and the OPEC Plus group of leading global oil producers, which includes Russia, were ongoing on other issues. Well, staying with the Russian president, he also delivered Russia's long-awaited response to that Western price cap. Now, the group of 7 major powers, the EU and Australia, agreed to the $60 per barrel price cap on Russia's seaborne crude oil, effective from December the 5th over Moscow's special military operation. Now, the decree published on the government portal, according to the Kremlin website, presented as a direct response to what they said were actions unfriendly and contradictory to international law by the US and foreign states. And also, it says international organizations that are joining them. Crude oil exports will be banned, but the date for the oil products ban will be determined by the Russian government, and it could be after the 1st of February. So, Anna, we've spoken about, a few other stories of, Russia, and this is its actions to, oil producers and to the price cap by the EU and Australia, and it says other international, countries that are following them. How is Kyiv responding to what he has said?
Well, Ukrainian President Zelensky, when the price limit was agreed, he said that of course Ukraine expected more, and he thinks that it's not enough. At least it's not enough for immediate effect and quicker effect on Russia, as of course Ukraine hopes for. So of course Ukraine would want more, let's say, more specific and strategic steps in terms of this price cap. But of course, we also understand from the other side that there are certain limitations as well, and certain rules that should be taken into consideration. So of course, it's for Ukraine, it's and everyone understands that it's a great step already. Ukraine wants it to be developed more, and probably price could go lower. But again, this is more, it's a more wider question for the discussions. Anyways, the step has been done, and it's definitely a positive step. And for Ukraine, it's a positive step because, of course, it would have an effect on Russia sooner or later. We also understand that it's a long-term effect more, and Ukraine also understands it. But still, it's definitely a way to go for Ukraine, as Ukrainian president particularly was highlighting that oil is probably the main question that should be raised, because this could have a very serious effect on Russian economy.
And Anna, we're also seeing that President Putin has been meeting with other presidents around, especially Lukashenko, the Belarusian president. What's Kyiv's attitude to Mr. Lukashenko, even though he has indeed said that the army has said that they will not be joining the war?
Well, for Ukraine, it's definite that Belarus, unfortunately, is a part of this war already, because Belarus territory is used by Russian forces not only for the shelling, but also for the attacks. As we remember, back in February, when full-scale invasion started, Belarus territory was used by Russian forces to get to this direct path to the city of Kyiv, to the capital of Ukraine. And it led to occupation of Kyiv, of some of the Kyiv regions for a short period of time, and a lot of atrocities and tragedies that followed. For Ukraine, Ukraine understands as well that Belarus is de facto occupied by Russia, and there are a lot of people in Belarus who do not support this. But they, if we look at that they definitely has little to say to President Lukashenko's actions and decisions, and Ukraine understand that de facto, unfortunately, Russia controls Belarus, and Belarus is playing a very big part for Russia's continuous war. As a lot of shelling and a lot of artillery systems, artillery systems on the border with Ukraine, but most importantly, the rocket launch systems are located on the territory of Belarus. And when these massive attacks across Ukraine are happening, they are happening also from the territory of Belarus. So, and Ukraine also controls, and there are constant reports from the intelligence and from the general staff of Ukraine about the situation at the border, because for Ukrainian officials and Ukrainian military, first of all, it's of course important to pay very specific attention to what's happening on the border, because the risk of another attack from Belarus territory remains. And for the moment, at least this is what was said by Ukrainian intelligence and Ukrainian military officials, that the risk is not very high for this point of time, but still it is existing. So in general, Ukrainian position, Ukrainian officials do not really see that Belarus would actually physically be involved in this war, again, for this point of time. So they do not see any signs that Belarus troops would join Russian troops physically in this war. But we already see that trainings are ongoing. We already see that Belarus is giving its territory and its experts, medical experts, for wounded Russian soldiers and for these field hospitals for Russian soldiers. So the risk is really high because, again, as I already said, Ukraine sees Belarus as de facto occupied territory by Russia, and anything could happen at that territory.
And Anna, also staying with, the Russian president and the speech that he gave, it was surprising that for the first time, the Russian president referred to, the invasion as a war. And to think that, his decree sort of outlaws or bans anyone from using that. And I hear thousands have been arrested in Russia for referring to it as a war, and then he is using it. I'm also hearing that there is sort of like an association that is taking him to court for doing that.
Well, at one point, the truth would come over and come forward. So, of course, everyone understands that it's not a special military operation. This is a real war. And, and even apparently even President Putin, he was probably influenced by the informational, space around him. Of course, we understand that that Russian propaganda would not use the war word to describe what's happening in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia right now. But President Putin would probably get to the point when he would have to accept that. So maybe this is one of the signs.
Well, we'll see what happens with that particular case. And just before we let you go, we know that it's, the deep of the winter. So for those on the front lines, how are they coping? And this is also with regards to infrastructure. Is there still the rationing in terms of, power, electricity?
Well, let's start with the front line. I should say that winter in Ukraine this year, at least for now, is quite warm. So no very low temperatures have been recorded yet. There were a couple of cold weeks, but not critically cold. So, but Ukrainian forces are quite prepared, thanks again to all the international partners' support. Ukrainian forces have quite a lot of winter equipment, like not equipment, but winter clothes and all the winter necessities in order to be able to feel comfortable in these conditions. Also, there are a lot of generators and all this kind of stuff on the front lines, and this allows, of course, Ukrainian soldiers to have this big advantage over Russian soldiers, because what we hear from the reports even by Russian, some of the Russian war commentators, that there is a problem for Russian forces for the moment, and according to Ukrainian soldiers, the situation is not bad. It's quite good with that. And also we hear from, of course, Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian military provides necessary winter equipment. But again, a lot of international support in these terms is crucial as well. And actually, Ukrainians are, again, what military is saying, that they are waiting for some freezing temperatures, because this could actually help in some regions, especially for fighting because when the land is freezed, it's easier to move forward. So basically, this is kind of well, it's a good condition for the moment. At least this is what we hear. Of course, there are difficulties and huge difficulties, especially from what we also see from the footage from the frontline areas. But still, Ukrainian army, they have certain advantage over Russian army. In terms of the energy sector, the situation remains difficult. But for the past, it's more than a week now that no massive attacks have been recorded. So situation is getting better. So in terms of electricity, more and more people have it back, and these outages are shorter. So they are existing. So still outages will be happening for the next couple of months for sure, until, well, at least this is what Ukrenergo, Ukrainian energy company, is saying, that until spring, until summer, if there are no hostility, like no massive attacks, until summer, the system would be able to be completely stabilized. But of course, Ukraine do not expect that no massive attacks would happen. So for the moment, it is stable. I mean, stable at that conditions that it could be, and it's getting better definitely than it was a couple of weeks ago. Heating is on, and for the moment, I should say that situation is not as critical as it could have been, and as it was a couple of weeks ago, and especially a month ago.
Yes, because we are hearing that it will take years to build back some of those infrastructure. Anna, thank you for joining me, and do continue to stay safe.
Thank you.
And to other stories, Pope Francis has been speaking on his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI, calling for prayers for the former Pope, whom he says is very ill. The 95-year-old Benedict became the first leader of the Catholic Church to stand down in 600 years in 2013. At the end of the Pope's final audience of the year, he asked people to pray a special prayer for Pope Emeritus Benedict. The Vatican then said the ex-Pope's health had worsened in recent hours. Vatican spokesperson Matteo Bruni says the situation at the moment remains under control, constantly followed by doctors. Pope Francis was addressing a general audience in the Vatican's hall, the 6th hall, when he looked up from a piece of paper and spoke about Benedict's declining health. He then went to visit him at the Mater Ecclesiae monastery, where Benedict has lived since he stepped down. Meanwhile, Cardinal Reinhard Marx, Archbishop of Munich and Freising, asked churchgoers to pray especially for the former Pope Benedict during a December church service after news that the former Pope was very sick broke. The former Pope Benedict, the 16th, 95, who in 2013 became the first pontiff to step down, he said in a statement that he had suffered a sudden worsening of his health in recent hours. He also said that his condition was under control and he was receiving constant medical attention. Conservatives have looked to the former Pope as their standard bearer, and some ultra-traditionalists even refused to acknowledge Francis as a legitimate pontiff. Until a few weeks ago, those who had seen the former Pope Benedict said his body was very frail, but his mind still very sharp. One of the latest known photographs of the former Pope was taken on December the 1st when he met the winners of a prize for theologians named after him. Since then, he's been living in a former convent inside the Vatican Gardens with his secretary and a few other aides and also medical staff. While still reactions trailing the former Pope's health, Germans attending a carol-singing traditional event as they wished him a peaceful time after hearing about the announcement. The Catholic German public identifies with him, and many say they have great respect for him and wish him well. And other respondents also said that it is likely no one can help Pope Benedict except prayers. Well, more faithfuls today joined Pope Francis in prayer for Pope Emeritus Benedict after the pontiff's appeal during the weekly audience. The Vatican said in a statement that he had suffered worsening of health. Since his resignation, former Pope had been living in the former convent inside the Vatican. Also, this has been shocking for a number of cardinals, saying that he had no longer had the physical, mental strength to run the church. This was when he announced his intention to resign as far back as February the 11th, 2013. Wishing him the very best in recovery. We still have more stories when we return. Do stay with us. Welcome back. Travelers expressed joy and excitement as the Ethiopian Airlines resumed flights to the capital of the war-torn northern region of Tigray for the first time in about 18 months. The announcement comes a day after a delegation of government officials and heads of public enterprises visited Mekelle to discuss the implementation of last month's peace agreement. Now, the agreement, which included promises to restore services under 2 years of fighting between the Ethiopian federal government and allies against the Tigrayan forces that killed thousands and displaced millions. Ethiopian Airlines CEO, who was part of the delegation to Mekelle, said in a statement that the resumption of the flights will enable families reunite, facilitate the restoration of commercial activities, stimulate tourist flow, and bring more people more opportunities, which will serve the society. The travel agent in Addis Ababa said the first Mekelle-bound flight was fully booked within hours of the announcement. Almost the entire region is now connected to the national power grid, and we understand telecom services have been restored in 27 towns there. This according to state media reports. Well, staying in Africa, buy second-hand, make a difference. This is the message two vintage lovers are projecting to the world. The duo, Prince Christ and James Darty, brought together a movement of young vintage enthusiasts pushing back against the global fast fashion industry by encouraging their peers to shop and wear used Western clothing.
Hours before sunrise, in a courtyard of shipping containers in Ghana's capital, Accra, vintage enthusiasts Christ and Darty comb through Kantamanto's rivers of imported clothes, searching for gems they can resell on Instagram pages with thousands of followers in Ghana and abroad.
We all know recycling helps the environment if we are being truthful. So if you wear a cloth that has been made back in the days, and you are not going to buy a new clothes, but you want to wear something that has been made previously, that way you are helping the environment by not using raw materials, using other things to reproduce new clothes.
The idea of everything right now is just to inspire everybody to shop or thrift vintage. So we are not just saying second-hand goods are second-class stuffs. So we are just trying to inspire people that shopping vintage makes recycling better.
According to the US-based foundation, Ghana receives around 15 million items of used clothing each week from Western countries and China, offloaded in bulk, often at negligible prices and questionable quality. Much of it passes through Accra's Kantamanto, one of the largest garment markets on the continent, where bales of used clothes are sold based on the expected quality of the garments wrapped up inside.
Remove the whole notion of you wear vintage only when you're poor, or you wear thrifted stuff when you don't have money, because it's been here for years. It's just buy it and wear it. It's like, why go and produce more when there's more than enough available to you?
The vintage founders believe buying second-hand not only helps to reduce fashion's environmental impact, but also allows them and their customers to express unique styles apart from current trends.
Let's go to South Africa, where the case against the 32-year-old driver of a truck which exploded on Christmas Eve has been dropped. That's according to police, due to insufficient evidence. The news has not gone down well with the families of the victims, especially now that the death toll has risen to 26. The accused, who was supposed to make his first court appearance today at the magistrate court, was not brought in because he had been released. The truck driver was traveling from Durban to Botswana when he drove under the low-lying bridge and got stuck there, and the truck exploded. 9 hospital staff who were at the scene to help are among those who succumbed to their injuries. 2 people are still missing and others still in hospital. One family lost 5 children in that explosion.
South African trade unions gathered outside the Boksburg Magistrate Court, saying the police need to be held accountable for the release of the truck driver who caused an explosion which not only took the lives of civilians but also health workers at the nearby Tambo Memorial Hospital, which is currently not taking in new patients.
We also have to deal with the reality that is facing us now. The Commissioner of Police needs to be held accountable. You can't have police that would have failed to do their job, claiming that there is no evidence. Well, evidence is everywhere else. There's people who were in the scene on the day who would have witnessed, who've spoken to the driver, which the driver confided in them. And those people were not at least being given a hearing by SAPS through their investigation. So for us, this is really something that is uncalled for. SAPS is equally to be blamed. They failed us as workers. They failed the community of Boksburg. In fact, they even failed themselves.
Jan Merakeng, who used to work for the trucking company Infinity Fleet Group, tells us what the driver should have done to try and avoid what happened.
He, as the driver, he was supposed to lower his airbags. If maybe he can even see that the tanker is still hooking in there, he was supposed to deflate his tires so that her tanker can go smooth under that bridge there, than to pull it all the way to the bridge. That's where the tanker make that compression and explode or blast.
Different government officials, including the Premier of Gauteng, Panyaza Lesufi, have visited different families of victims who lost their lives. Overnight, the number of the dead has risen from 18 to 26, and some of the victims are in critical condition. Now that the truck driver has been released, there are more questions than answers. What happens next? What happened to the docket? And what closure will the victims' families receive? From Johannesburg, South Africa, Brian Pugeni, Channels Television News.
Away from South Africa, Prime Minister-designate Benjamin Netanyahu finalized coalition deals with his allied parties today as his prospective nationalist partners sought to quell fears about the most right-wing government in Israel's history. Mr. Netanyahu, whose bloc of nationalists and religious parties won a clear election victory last month, is expected to swear in his new government tomorrow, completing his political comeback with a record 6th term in office. But even before starting his record 6th term, he sought to calm concerns at home and abroad. His emerging government will endanger minority rights, harm the judiciary, and exacerbate the conflict with the Palestinians. The coalition deals have yet to be formally published, but leaked clauses and statements by future coalition members over the past few weeks have drawn wide criticism. A spokesman for Netanyahu's Likud party said all the coalition deals will be published by the Knesset, where recent legislation pushed by the emerging coalition has further irked opponents. Well, the Knesset yesterday ratified new powers over police by Itamar Ben-Gvir, head of the far-right Jewish party, as National Security Minister. And this is also amid concern from jurists and opposition lawmakers that the bill risks politicizing criminal probes. And let's go over to the situation of the weather in the United States as a winter storm covered a Scandinavian-themed gift shop in Wisconsin with ice on Christmas Eve. leaving breathtaking images along the U.S. Great Lakes. Video and photos posted on the Simply Scandinavian Facebook page show the wooden building transformed into an ice fortress. Local news reported that about 96 kilometers per hour whipped across the area, which is located on Lake Michigan. An eyewitness video showed a frozen structure on Avon Lake, Ohio, Monday. Now, the lake is located northern Ohio off Lake Erie. The region in and around Buffalo, New York, downwind of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, emerged as ground zero for an Arctic deep freeze and massive winter storm that extended over most of the U.S. last week and through the Christmas holiday as far south as the Mexican border. Well, as we wrap up the program today, the Christmas markets are in full swing and elaborate decorations can also be seen around. This is Moscow, that's in Russia, ahead of traditional New Year celebrations. This December, Muscovites have enjoyed especially snowy weather, creating more of a holiday mood. New Year's Day is Russia's main seasonal holiday, while Orthodox believers also celebrate Christmas on January 7th. However, reminders of the Ukraine conflict are inescapable. The Latin letters Z, V, and O, symbols adopted by the Russian military, are brightly illuminated near the entrance to Moscow's famous Gorky Park. And that's our show this evening. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Walker. Bye for now.